maintenance alert pinged my tablet at 7:23 a.m., same as any other Tuesday. Building 7, Floor 3, HVAC anomaly reported. I'd been the senior systems engineer at Meridian Corporate Complex for 6 years, long enough to know that anomaly usually meant a blown fuse or a stuck damper. Nothing a 20-minute diagnostic couldn't fix. I grabbed my toolkit and headed for the elevator, already mentally cataloging the likely culprits. The third-floor HVAC had been acting up since the corporate efficiency upgrades last month. New pressure regulators, they'd said. State-of-the-art environmental controls to reduce operating costs. I'd argued against the installation timeline, too fast, too little testing, but Calith had overruled me. Company directive from the top. The elevator hummed upward, and I checked the building schematics on my tablet. Floor 3 housed the Sunrise Day Care Center. 43 kids between ages 2 and 7, plus 8 staff members. Sura worked there as the environmental safety coordinator. We'd been dating for 8 months now, long enough for me to know she'd be the one filing these maintenance reports the moment anything seemed off. She had a protective instinct that bordered on paranoia, especially when it came to the kids. The doors opened to chaos. Steam billowed from the mechanical room doorway, obscuring the hallway in a thick, impossible fog. The temperature felt normal, maybe 72 degrees, but water vapor hung in the air like we were standing inside a sauna. My skin prickled with moisture that shouldn't exist. Pon! Sura's voice cut through the haze. She emerged from the daycare entrance, her usually pristine safety coordinator uniform dampened with condensation. Thank God you're here. Something's wrong with the water systems. Define wrong. I pulled out my pressure gauge, habit taking over. The readings looked normal. 14.7 psi atmospheric, standard building pressure maintained. But the steam kept rolling. The kids' bathroom sink started steaming 20 minutes ago. Not hot water, the cold tap. Room temperature steam, Vorn. That's impossible. I followed her toward the mechanical room, my boots squelching on the increasingly wet carpet. The vapor grew thicker with each step, carrying a metallic taste that coated my tongue. Static electricity made my arm hair stand up, and somewhere deep in the building's infrastructure, I heard the groaning of metal under stress. Have you checked the boiler room? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Our building used a closed-loop hydronic system. No way for boiler steam to reach the upper floors without massive system failure. First place I looked. Everything normal down there. This is coming from the third-floor mechanical room. We reached the doorway, and I stopped dead. Through the rolling steam, I could see the main waterline junction. The thick copper pipes that fed the entire floor were intact, no visible leaks or ruptures. But water dripped from every joint, every connection point, forming puddles that immediately began steaming upward into impossible vapor. I touched one of the puddles with my finger. Room temperature, maybe 68 degrees. But steam rose from its surface like I dipped my hand in a hot spring. This defies basic thermodynamics, I muttered, pulling out my thermal imaging scanner. The device showed the water at exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit, while the surrounding air registered 72 degrees Fahrenheit. According to every law of physics I knew, that water should be cooling through evaporation, not steaming. The pressure readings are normal, I told Sura, showing her my gauge. 14.7 psi atmospheric, no fluctuations. But something's causing water to phase change at impossible temperatures. She gripped my arm, her fingers cold and damp. Vorn, there are 43 children in that daycare. If the water systems are compromised. I know. The weight of it hit me then. This wasn't just a mechanical anomaly. Every sink, every drinking fountain, every emergency sprinkler head in the building connected to these main lines. If whatever was happening here spread to other floors, a metallic groan echoed from inside the mechanical room, followed by the sharp crack of overstressed joints. I aimed my flashlight into the steam and saw the first signs of structural stress. The main support beam above the water lines had developed a hairline crack, probably from repeated thermal expansion and contraction as the impossible steam condensed and re-evaporated against the ceiling. We need to evacuate the daycare, I said. Now. Already started. Sura pulled out her radio. But Vorn, this isn't just our floor. I've got reports coming in from Building 6 and Building 9. Same thing, room temperature water turning to steam. My blood went cold. 3 buildings, all connected to the same central HVAC and water management systems. All upgraded with the new pressure regulators last month. The coincidence felt too precise, too systematic. I keyed my own radio, calling maintenance control. "This is Vorn Hendricks, Senior Systems. I need Caliph down here immediately. We've got a code yellow environmental hazard spreading across multiple buildings." Static answered me. Then, "Hendricks, this is Control. Caliph is in an emergency meeting with corporate. Can you handle this routine maintenance issue?" Routine maintenance. I stared at the impossible steam, at the cracking ceiling beam, at the water that defied every scientific principle I'd studied for 15 years. "Control, this is not routine. We need full building evacuation protocols initiated immediately." Negative, Hendricks. Corporate directive is to minimize disruption to daily operations. Handle the issue locally and file your report by end of shift. The radio went dead. Sura looked at me with growing fear in her eyes. "They're not taking this seriously." "No," I agreed, watching more steam billow from the mechanical room. The metallic taste in the air was getting stronger, and I could swear the static electricity was building up. My skin tingled like I was standing too close to a Tesla coil. But the worst part was the memory nagging at the back of my mind, something Alira had mentioned during the pressure regulator installation. Alira Chun, the former contractor who'd worked on our systems for 3 years before the Corporate Efficiency Initiative eliminated her position. She'd pulled me aside the day before the new equipment went online, her face tight with worry. "Vorn, those pressure regulators aren't standard issue. I've never seen atmospheric interface modules like that integrated into basic HVAC systems. Someone's pushing these installations to do things they were never designed for." I dismissed her concerns as sour grapes from a displaced contractor. Now, watching room temperature water defy physics, I wondered what else she'd tried to warn me about. "Sura, I need you to finish evacuating the kids. Get them to the parking lot, minimum 50 yards from any building." "What are you going to do?" I looked at the mechanical room, at the impossible steam, at the hairline cracks spreading across the ceiling beam. "I'm going to figure out what those new pressure regulators are really doing to our building's atmospheric systems." And I was going to call Alira. The steam thickened around us as another joint somewhere in the wall gave way with a sharp metallic snap. Water that shouldn't exist as vapor at room temperature continued pouring from every pipe connection, defying physics and threatening the structural integrity of everything I'd spent 6 years maintaining. 43 kids were depending on me to understand what was happening. I just hoped I could figure it out before the entire building's infrastructure collapsed under the weight of impossible science. My call to Alira went straight to voicemail. Of course it did. She probably had my number blocked after the way corporate had handled her termination. I left a message anyway. "Alira, it's Vorn. Something's wrong with those pressure regulators you warned me about. The water's boiling at room temperature. Call me back, lives are at stake." The elevator ride to the basement felt like descending into a nightmare. Each floor I passed showed signs of the spreading anomaly. Steam seeping from under doors, wet carpet stains in hallways, and the distant sound of stressed metal groaning under impossible thermal loads. By the time I reached the mechanical basement, my clothes were damp with condensation that had no business existing. The basement mechanical room housed the building's central systems, the heart that pumped life through 12 floors of office space and that daycare center. I'd spent hundreds of hours down here over the years, knew every pipe joint and pressure valve by sight. What I found waiting for me made my hands shake. Every single water line was sweating impossible steam. The main distribution manifold, a thick steel assembly that split building water pressure between floors, looked like it was crying. Droplets formed constantly along every surface, immediately vaporizing into steam that shouldn't exist. My thermal gun confirmed what my eyes were telling me. Water temperature held steady at 66 degrees Fahrenheit while producing vapor like it was boiling. But worse than the impossible physics was what the steam was doing to the infrastructure around it. The support beam directly above the main manifold showed stress fractures along its entire length. The constant expansion and contraction from steam formation and condensation was tearing apart metal designed to last decades. Electrical conduits were corroding at accelerated rates, their protective coatings peeling away under the strange atmospheric conditions. Orange rust flakes drifted down like toxic snow. I pulled out my tablet and started documenting everything, taking pictures and pressure readings. Whatever was happening here wasn't random, it was systematic, affecting every connection point in the water distribution system simultaneously. The pattern suggested atmospheric pressure manipulation at the molecular level, something far beyond what standard HVAC pressure regulators should be capable of. My radio crackled. Vorn, this is Sura. We've got a problem. Define problem. I'm looking at impossible steam production across our entire water distribution network. Building 9 just lost main power. Emergency backup is maintaining critical systems only. No HVAC, minimal lighting. And phone. Her voice carried a new edge of panic. The children are asking why all the water fountains outside are making steam clouds. It's spreading to the municipal connections. I ran to the basement window and looked out at the employee parking lot. Steam rose from 3 different drinking fountains like tiny geysers. The effect was spreading beyond our buildings into the municipal water connections. How many buildings total showing symptoms? 8 confirmed now. The entire East Campus plus 2 buildings on the north side. Every structure that received the pressure regulator upgrades. Static crackled through her transmission. Vorn, maintenance crews are reporting structural damage. Ceiling tiles falling, wall cracks, support beam stress. This is becoming a collapse risk. That confirmed my worst fear. This wasn't equipment failure. This was systematic malfunction across multiple installations. Whatever those pressure regulators were really designed to do, it wasn't standard environmental control. I tried calling Caleth again, got shunted to his voicemail. Corporate meeting, my ass. Someone was deliberately keeping building management out of the loop while their infrastructure experiment went catastrophically wrong. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Meet me at the service tunnel between buildings 7 and 8. Come alone. E. Alira. The service tunnel was one of the older parts of the complex, built during the original construction 15 years ago. It housed the main utility connections between buildings, water, power, and the centralized HVAC distribution network. I'd only been down there a handful of times for major maintenance projects. I found Alira waiting near the main pressure distribution hub, her contractor's toolkit spread across the tunnel floor. She looked up as I approached, her face grim in the emergency lighting. It's worse than I thought it would be, she said without preamble. How many buildings are affected? At least 6, maybe 8. Alira, what the hell did they install in our systems? She held up a device about the size of a laptop, bristling with sensors and wireless antennas I'd never seen in standard HVAC equipment. Multiple warning labels in what looked like military specification formatting covered its surface. Atmospheric pressure manipulation array. Submarine-grade environmental control system, retrofitted for building integration by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. That's impossible. Why would anyone need submarine pressure control in an office building? They don't. Her voice was flat, angry. These devices can create localized pressure differential zones, increase or decrease atmospheric pressure in specific areas independently of surrounding environment. In a submarine, you use that to manage hull stress and air recycling efficiency. I stared at the device, pieces clicking together in my mind. But if you integrated them into a building's water distribution system, you could manipulate water's phase transition by controlling atmospheric pressure at the molecular level around pipe networks. She connected her diagnostic tablet to the device, displaying readings that made my engineering degree feel like a community college certificate. Lower the localized atmospheric pressure around water molecules to roughly 0.6 psi, and they'll phase change to vapor at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Physics still works, we're just changing the environmental parameters. Jesus Christ. Why? That's what I've been trying to figure out. She pulled up installation schematics on her tablet, technical drawings I'd never seen before, showing pressure array integration points throughout the corporate complex. These weren't installed for environmental efficiency. Look at the placement pattern. The schematics revealed arrays positioned not for optimal HVAC distribution, but for maximum atmospheric control over specific areas. Server rooms, executive floors, document storage, and security checkpoints. The daycare center sat directly above a major distribution nexus, its water systems connected to the same pressure-controlled network by pure architectural accident. Alira, are you telling me someone deliberately installed experimental military equipment in our buildings? Not experimental at all. Proven military technology, just repurposed for civilian infrastructure control. She packed up her tools with nervous efficiency, constantly checking the tunnel entrance. Vorn, they fired me because I documented the installation specs and asked too many questions. When I tried to report safety concerns through official channels, suddenly my security clearance got revoked and my contract terminated. They buried me in non-disclosure agreements. A new sound echoed through the service tunnel, the deep groan of overstressed infrastructure. Somewhere above us, building systems were failing under the load of impossible atmospheric manipulation. "We have to shut these down," I said, "before they cause structural collapse." They're networked with fail-safe protocols. Alira's diagnostic screen showed system status across all building installations. Individual shutdown triggers automatic pressure equalization, rapid atmospheric changes that could cause structural decompression. Imagine all that steam suddenly condensing back to water simultaneously. The pressure shock could collapse support structures. So we're trapped. These things are tearing apart our infrastructure, but we can't turn them off without potentially killing people. Not trapped, but the shutdown sequence has to be coordinated across all units simultaneously. She showed me the control interface. Problem is, I don't have administrative access anymore. Only building management can authorize system-wide shutdown. I tried my radio again. "Control, this is Vorn Hendricks. I need immediate contact with Calith or senior building management. We have a code red infrastructure emergency." Static answered longer this time. Then, "Hendricks, you're creating unnecessary panic with these reports. Corporate has classified this as a minor maintenance situation. Continue with standard protocols or face disciplinary action." Alira looked at me with grim understanding. "They're not going to help, are they?" "No." I looked at her tablet, at the pressure readings showing continued atmospheric manipulation across 6 buildings, at the structural stress indicators climbing toward critical failure points. They're going to let this continue until it's too late to contain. Above us, another support beam gave way with a sound like gunfire. The impossible steam was winning, tearing apart everything we'd built while corporate management played ignorance games with people's lives. 43 kids in that daycare center. Hundreds of office workers. All depending on infrastructure that was being systematically destroyed by equipment they never knew was installed. "Alira, can you get us administrative access to the shutdown controls?" Her smile held no humor, only bitter professional pride. "Vorn, I wrote the integration protocols for these systems before they classified me as a security risk. Getting administrative access won't be the problem. Then what will be? The question isn't whether we can shut them down." She gestured at her diagnostic readings, showing pressure arrays operating far beyond safe parameters. "It's whether we can do it before the atmospheric manipulation tears apart every load-bearing structure in 8 buildings." The building groaned around us again, metal and concrete stressed beyond design limits by atmospheric pressure that defied physics. We had maybe hours before catastrophic structural failure. Time to find out what our employers were really doing to us, and stop it before the impossible steam brought down everything we'd spent years maintaining. I found Alira where she'd promised to meet me, in the service tunnel between buildings 7 and 8, hunched over her tablet with the focused intensity of someone racing against time. The tunnel felt colder despite impossible steam seeping through ventilation grates, and her contractor's toolkit was spread across the concrete floor like a field hospital for dying infrastructure. "Status report," I said, kneeling beside her improvised workstation. 9 buildings confirmed affected now, she said without looking up. The pressure arrays are operating in synchronized cascade mode. Each unit amplifies the effects of neighboring installations. She pulled up a real-time monitoring display showing atmospheric pressure readings across the complex. "Look at this pattern." The data visualization resembled a spider web of interconnected pressure manipulation zones, each array creating localized atmospheric disturbances that reinforced and amplified adjacent effects. The engineering was elegant and terrifying, a distributed system designed to create precisely controlled environmental conditions across multiple structures simultaneously. "Alira, this level of coordination doesn't happen by accident. Someone programmed these arrays to work together in exactly this configuration. That's what I've been trying to tell people for 6 months." She connected a second diagnostic device to the tunnel's main distribution hub, revealing deeper system architecture than I'd ever seen in building schematics. "These aren't malfunctioning HVAC components, Vorn. They're working exactly as designed." My radio crackled with Sura's voice, tight with barely controlled panic. "Vorn, Building 12 just reported complete water system failure. Steam pressure blew out their main distribution manifold, flooded 3 floors, and knocked out emergency power to the elevator systems. We're looking at potential electrocution hazards and people trapped above the 3rd floor." I keyed the radio. "Any injuries?" "Maintenance crew got scalded by steam that shouldn't exist. Second-degree burns from water that registered 70 degrees Fahrenheit on thermal sensors. Static interfered with her transmission. Vorn, the children, some of them are showing respiratory distress from the atmospheric pressure changes. We need to evacuate. Negative on evacuation. Moving them outside could be worse. These pressure differentials might extend beyond the buildings. I looked at Alira's readings. How far does the affected zone reach? She overlaid GPS coordinates onto the pressure monitoring display. Based on these readings, the atmospheric manipulation field extends roughly 400 meters beyond the outermost building installations. Anyone in that zone is experiencing pressure variations their bodies aren't adapted for. That meant the entire corporate complex plus surrounding parking areas and access roads. Hundreds of people trapped in an invisible atmospheric cage where physics operated by different rules. There has to be a pattern, I muttered, studying the installation schematics. Military equipment doesn't get retrofitted into civilian buildings without specific operational requirements. Alira's tablet chimed with an incoming encrypted file transfer. She frowned at the notification, then glanced toward the tunnel entrance with the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust convenient timing. That's odd. Receiving data from the building management network, but it's coming through Kalitha's administrative account. Kalitha's been unreachable all day. Claims he's been in corporate meetings since dawn. My throat felt tight with the implications. If someone else is using his credentials, then who's accessing his credentials? She opened the transferred file, revealing documentation that made my stomach drop. Vorn, these are the original installation contracts. Real ones, not the sanitized versions in our maintenance database. The documents revealed a project called Environmental Conditioning Research Initiative, a joint venture between our corporate parent company and something called Meridian Defense Solutions. The pressure arrays weren't malfunctioning building equipment. They were functioning research infrastructure, installed to test civilian population response to controlled atmospheric manipulation scenarios. Jesus Christ, we're test subjects. Gets worse. Alira scrolled through project timelines and test protocols. Phase 1 was baseline atmospheric mapping, 6 months of normal operations while they monitored employee health metrics, productivity levels, and stress responses. Phase 2. She paused, reading ahead. Phase 2 was supposed to be gradual pressure introduction over 3 weeks, slowly acclimating occupants to modified atmospheric conditions. But something went wrong with the gradual introduction. No, her voice was hollow. Something went right with the emergency protocol activation. Look at the test schedule. Today's date is marked as rapid response scenario initiation. They're testing how quickly they can establish complete atmospheric control over a civilian population. The service tunnel suddenly felt claustrophobic despite its concrete spaciousness. Every breath I took was happening inside someone else's controlled experiment, every heartbeat monitored by equipment I'd helped maintain without understanding its true purpose. My radio erupted with overlapping emergency traffic. Partial structural failure in Building 6 mechanical room. Ambulance services can't establish staging area inside the pressure zone. Daycare reporting children with nausea and balance issues. Main water pressure dropping to critical levels across all affected buildings. I fought through the chaos on emergency frequency. All stations, this is Hendrix. Emergency radio discipline, essential traffic only. Sura, give me status on the daycare center. 14 children showing symptoms consistent with rapid altitude changes. Nausea, disorientation, some having trouble keeping their balance. Her voice carried the controlled tension of someone watching kids suffer from forces she couldn't see or fight. The little ones don't understand why they feel sick. How much longer before you can stop this? Working on it. I turned to Alira. Can we override the test protocol? Maybe. But Vorn, if we interrupt an active research scenario, they'll know someone discovered the real purpose of these installations. She showed me security monitoring logs embedded in the system architecture. They're tracking every access attempt, every diagnostic query, every maintenance action. The moment we try to shut down their experiment, they'll know exactly who compromised their research. Let them know. 43 kids are getting sick from their atmospheric manipulation games. That's not the only problem. Alira pulled up a new display showing regional infrastructure connections. These pressure arrays are connected to municipal water systems, power grid monitoring stations, and emergency services communication networks. If they wanted to expand this test beyond our corporate complex, the implications hit me like cold water. An atmospheric manipulation system integrated into municipal infrastructure could control environmental conditions across entire city districts. Emergency services couldn't respond to crises in areas where atmospheric pressure made their equipment unreliable. Municipal water systems could be weaponized by manipulating phase transitions at the molecular level. They're not just testing building environmental control, I said, pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. They're testing citywide population control through weaponized infrastructure. And we've been maintaining the proof of concept installation for them. Alira pulled up the shutdown interface, her hands hovering over controls that could save or damn everyone in the complex. Vorn, I can trigger emergency shutdown, but there's a cascade sequence. When 9 buildings worth of atmospheric manipulation suddenly stops, the pressure equalization could cause explosive decompression. How bad? Every affected water line returning to normal atmospheric pressure simultaneously. Steam condensing back to liquid in microseconds, then expanding again as pressures equalize. She showed me engineering simulations that looked like controlled demolition scenarios. Pipe systems could implode, then explode outward. We're risking structural collapse from rapid pressure transitions. Finally, Kalith's voice cut through the radio static. Vorn, this is Kalith. I need to know your exact location, now. The urgency in his tone made my stomach clench. Building Management Service Tunnel, investigating the pressure system malfunctions with Alira. Where the hell have you been all day? Locked in conference room A with corporate security and legal counsel for the past 7 hours, answering questions about unauthorized access to classified building systems. His words came fast, breathless. Vorn, they know someone's been digging into the real specifications for those pressure regulators. They've been monitoring every diagnostic query, every maintenance access, every system ping. Kalith, listen carefully. Those pressure regulators aren't HVAC components. They're military-grade atmospheric manipulation arrays installed as part of a research project testing population control through infrastructure manipulation. We're the test subjects. Dead silence stretched across the radio frequency. Then, barely audible, Jesus Christ. Kalith, do you copy? I copy. When his voice returned, it carried the hollow tone of a man watching his world collapse. Vorn, when I authorized the installation contracts for those systems, corporate presented them as cutting-edge environmental efficiency technology, classified due to competitive advantage and patent concerns. He paused, breathing hard. I had no idea they were designed for atmospheric pressure manipulation or population research. I thought I was signing off on advanced climate control systems. You didn't know? I didn't know they were designed to manipulate atmospheric pressure for population research. I thought I was approving advanced climate control technology. The admission carried the weight of a man realizing he'd been played. But Vorn, now that they know we've discovered the real purpose, corporate security is mobilizing to contain information about the research project. What's our timeline? I asked, dreading the answer. Corporate security is implementing containment protocols. They can't allow information about this research project to reach regulatory agencies or emergency services. It would destroy the company and compromise national defense contracts. Static cut through his words. We have maybe 20 minutes before they lock down the entire complex and declare this a classified security incident. Anyone inside the affected area becomes part of the research data until the project reaches completion. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning they'll let the experiment run its course while monitoring how civilian populations adapt to controlled atmospheric pressure manipulation over extended periods. Days, maybe weeks, depending on their research parameters. Alira looked up from her tablet, her face pale in the emergency lighting. Vorn, I've accessed the shutdown protocols through a backdoor I built into the system during installation. But if we abort this experiment, they'll know exactly who compromised their research. She showed me security monitoring logs tracking our every move. The moment we initiate emergency shutdown, corporate security will have digital evidence of our interference. Let them have it. 14 kids are getting sick from their atmospheric manipulation research. There's another problem. Her fingers moved across diagnostic screens with surgical precision. These pressure arrays integrate with municipal infrastructure, water systems, power grid monitoring, emergency services communication networks. If they expand this test beyond our corporate complex, the implications made my hands shake. An atmospheric manipulation system tied into city infrastructure could control environmental conditions across entire districts. Emergency responders wouldn't be able to operate in areas where atmospheric pressure made their equipment unreliable. Municipal water systems could become weapons by manipulating phase transitions at the molecular level. The service tunnel suddenly felt like the center of a web we'd been caught in for months without realizing. Every maintenance task, every system upgrade, every routine inspection had been part of someone else's research protocol. We'd been lab rats maintaining our own maze. Alira, can you guarantee the shutdown won't cause structural collapse? I can minimize the risk, but not eliminate it. The alternative is letting them continue the experiment until they achieve whatever research objectives they're testing. Above us, steel groaned under impossible thermal stress, the sound of infrastructure slowly tearing itself apart while corporate researchers collected data on how civilian populations responded to weaponized environmental control. Can you minimize the decompression risk? I asked. I can sequence the shutdown to reduce sudden pressure changes, but I can't eliminate the danger entirely. Her voice was steady despite the magnitude of what she was proposing. The alternative is letting them continue this experiment until they collect whatever research data they need, however long that takes. I keyed my radio. Sura, I need you to move those children to the most structurally sound area you can find. Interior corridors, away from windows and exterior walls. Prepare for potential building instability. Copy. Vorn, some of these kids are really struggling with the pressure changes. How much longer? Not long. I switched frequencies. Kalith, can you initiate building-wide emergency notifications? Already drafting them. Warning all occupants to brace for sudden atmospheric pressure changes and potential infrastructure failure. Alira's tablet displayed the shutdown interface, a control system designed to prevent exactly what we were attempting. Vorn, once I start this sequence, there's no aborting it. The arrays will either shut down in controlled sequence or we'll discover what explosive decompression looks like from ground zero. I watched her navigate through security protocols, understanding that we were gambling hundreds of lives against corporate research objectives. Do it. She initiated the emergency shutdown protocol. Every light in the service tunnel died instantly, plunging us into absolute darkness as 9 buildings worth of atmospheric manipulation equipment began their violent return to normal physics. Above us, impossible steam that had been methodically destroying our infrastructure started its chaotic transformation back to the laws of nature we understood. The sound that followed was like reality itself screaming. The emergency klaxon's wail cut through the morning air as I reached the courtyard between buildings 7 and 8, my radio crackling with overlapping distress calls that painted a picture of coordinated catastrophe. What Alira had revealed in the service tunnel, that these weren't malfunctioning HVAC systems but functioning atmospheric manipulation arrays, was now playing out across the entire corporate campus in real time. Vorn, Building 12's main water line just ruptured. Steam explosion took out half the mechanical room. Sura's voice carried over the radio static, tight with the controlled panic of someone watching infrastructure collapse in real time. We've got scalding injuries from water that's reading normal temperature on every sensor we have. I keyed my radio while dodging a shower of condensation from the Building 8 overhang. Any structural damage? Ceiling collapse in the east wing. The daycare had to evacuate to the gymnasium. Some of the kids are showing altitude sickness symptoms. Her transmission broke up with interference. Vorn, the little ones don't understand why they feel sick. We need answers. Through the glass doors of Building 8, I could see the lobby had been transformed into an emergency command center. Alira stood at the center of it, surrounded by diagnostic equipment, printouts, and tablet displays showing real-time pressure readings from across the campus. Her contractor's toolkit had evolved into what looked like a field hospital for dying infrastructure. But she wasn't alone. Kalith was there too, hunched over a building management terminal, his usually immaculate shirt wrinkled, and his expression carrying the weight of someone who'd spent hours answering questions he didn't want to answer. Status report, I said, dropping beside their improvised workstation. 13 buildings confirmed affected now, Alira said without looking up from her primary display. And Kalith has been briefing me on what corporate security told him during his 5-hour interview. Kalith looked up from his terminal, his face grim. They know we've been investigating the pressure systems, Vorn. They've been monitoring every diagnostic query, every maintenance access, every system check we've made. He gestured toward Alira's displays. The good news is they gave me administrative access to help contain the situation. The bad news is we now know exactly what we're dealing with. The visualization on Alira's screen resembled a military coordination network, each building's atmospheric manipulation creating precise interference patterns that reinforced and amplified the effects of neighboring installations. The timing was too perfect, the geometric relationships too exact for coincidental malfunction. Environmental Response Research Initiative, Caleth said, reading from his terminal. Joint project between our parent company and Meridian Defense Solutions. Phase 2 implementation. Rapid atmospheric control establishment for civilian population stress response analysis. We're not facility managers responding to equipment failure, I said, the reality hitting like a physical blow. We're test subjects. Gets worse, Alira said, pulling up building schematics I'd never seen before. These atmospheric arrays are integrated into municipal water systems, power grid monitoring, and emergency services communication networks. If they wanted to expand this test beyond our corporate complex, they could control environmental conditions across entire city districts, Caleth finished. Emergency services couldn't respond to crises in areas where their equipment becomes unreliable due to atmospheric pressure manipulation. My radio exploded with overlapping emergency transmissions from across the campus. Building 6 partial ceiling collapse in mechanical room. Elevator system failure in Building 4, 15 people trapped. Children in daycare showing altitude sickness symptoms. Ambulance services unable to approach closer than outer parking lot. Water pressure dropping to critical levels in buildings 9 through 12. I fought through the chaos on emergency frequency. All stations, this is Hendrix. Emergency radio discipline, essential traffic only. Sura, give me status on the daycare center. 21 children now showing symptoms consistent with rapid altitude changes. Nausea, disorientation, difficulty maintaining balance. Her voice carried the barely controlled desperation of someone watching kids suffer from forces she couldn't see, fight, or explain. The medical staff from Building 3 tried to reach us, but their equipment is malfunctioning the same way ours is. Pulse oximeters giving impossible readings, blood pressure cuffs won't inflate properly. How long can you manage the situation there? Not much longer. Some of the older children are starting to panic because they can see the adults are scared. Her transmission broke up with interference. Vorn, I need to know if help is coming, or if we need to try moving them outside despite the risks. Sura, emergency services are having the same equipment problems we are. The atmospheric manipulation field extends roughly 400 meters beyond our buildings. I looked at the pressure monitoring display Alira had pulled up. Moving the children outside could expose them to even more severe pressure differentials. Then what's our option? Caleth looked up from his terminal. Corporate security just sent new orders. We're to implement research containment protocols immediately. They want us to maintain current atmospheric conditions while they collect final data points. What the hell does that mean? I asked. It means they're ordering us to keep the experiment running while people are getting hurt. His voice was tight with anger. They classify this as a controlled research environment that can't be disrupted until they achieve satisfactory data collection. Alira's tablet chimed with an incoming priority message. She read it quickly, then looked up with barely controlled rage. Phase 3 authorization just came through the system. Extended duration atmospheric stress testing with expanded subject pool. They want to make it worse? They want to bring in additional civilian populations for comparison data. She showed me the message details. Municipal maintenance crews, emergency responders, and media personnel will be allowed into the research zone to provide control group data on untrained civilian response to atmospheric manipulation. The Building 8 lobby suddenly felt like the nerve center of something much larger and more sinister than building management. We weren't just trapped inside someone else's research project, we were being ordered to help expand it. Can we access the shutdown protocols? I asked. I can, Caleth said, his administrative access giving him capabilities Alira and I didn't have. But Vorn, the moment we try to shut down the atmospheric arrays, corporate security will know exactly who terminated their research. And according to the briefing they gave me, research disruption is classified as sabotage of federal defense projects. What's the penalty for federal defense project sabotage? The kind that keeps you in federal prison for the rest of your life. Above us, the building's steel framework continued its ominous groaning as superheated steam expanded through systems never designed for such conditions. Through the lobby windows, I could see employees from multiple buildings still gathered in the courtyard, But now they were being approached by personnel I didn't recognize. People in dark suits with badges and earpieces who were directing everyone toward specific areas. "They're segregating the test subjects," Elira said, watching the activity outside. "Separating building maintenance staff from general employees, isolating people who might have technical knowledge about what's really happening. Building management personnel are being classified as research-aware subjects," Caleth read from his terminal. "We're being moved to a separate data collection protocol." My radio crackled with Sura's voice, now tight with new urgency. "Vorn, we have federal agents at the daycare center. They're telling the staff that this is a classified emergency response exercise and that we need to maintain current conditions for safety evaluation purposes." "Are they preventing evacuation?" "They're preventing communication with anyone outside the complex. They took our cell phones and said external contact could compromise emergency response coordination." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Vorn, some of these children are getting really sick, and the agents are taking notes on everything. How many kids are affected, what symptoms they're showing, how the staff is responding." "They're not here to help," I said. "They're here to collect research data on how children respond to atmospheric manipulation." The lobby windows suddenly reflected new activity, multiple vehicles arriving at the complex perimeter. But instead of emergency services coming to help, it looked like additional research personnel setting up equipment to monitor the expanded test population. "Caleth, can you guarantee the shutdown won't cause structural collapse? The engineering simulations show acceptable risk levels, but Vorn." He gestured toward his terminal. "The federal agents have administrative override on all building systems now. Even if we wanted to shut down the atmospheric arrays, we'd need their authorization codes." "Then we get their authorization codes." "How?" I looked around the lobby at our improvised command center, then at the federal agents outside who were treating sick children as research data points. "We make them an offer they can't refuse." My radio crackled with overlapping emergency transmissions. Structural stress in Building 12 support columns. Elevator rescue attempts failing due to atmospheric pressure differential. Several adults now reporting respiratory distress. Municipal emergency services requesting federal assistance for unknown atmospheric anomaly. Above us, the building's steel framework groaned under impossible thermal stress as superheated steam condensed and expanded through systems never designed for such conditions. The infrastructure was slowly tearing itself apart while corporate researchers collected data on how civilian populations responded to weaponized environmental control. "Elira, can you guarantee the shutdown won't cause explosive decompression?" "I can minimize structural damage risk, but not eliminate it completely." She showed me engineering simulations of the shutdown sequence. The alternative is allowing them to continue the research until they achieve whatever data collection objectives they're testing. Through the lobby windows, I could see employees from multiple buildings gathering in the courtyard, looking up at their workplaces with the bewildered expression of people whose familiar environment had become alien and threatening. Children's faces pressed against the daycare windows, confused by adults who couldn't explain why they felt sick in air that looked perfectly normal. "Do it," I said, keying my radio. "Sura, prepare for potential building instability. Move everyone to the most structurally sound interior locations available." "Copy." "Caleth, I need building-wide emergency notifications. Tell everyone to brace for sudden atmospheric pressure changes and possible system failures." "Already initiating." Elira's fingers moved across the shutdown interface with surgical precision, navigating through multiple layers of security protocols designed to prevent exactly what we were attempting. "Vorn, once I start this sequence, there's no stopping it. The system will either shut down safely, or we'll discover what happens when 8 buildings worth of atmospheric pressure suddenly equalizes." "Do it anyway." She initiated the emergency shutdown protocol. Every light in Building 8 flickered and died, leaving us in the gray half-darkness of emergency power as atmospheric manipulation arrays across the entire corporate complex began their coordinated shutdown sequence. The sound was like a massive engine winding down, accompanied by the groaning of infrastructure returning to normal physics after hours of operating under impossible conditions. Outside, the visible steam that had been rising from manholes and building vents began to dissipate as water throughout the complex started behaving according to the laws of thermodynamics we understood. But the sound of equalizing pressure was like the earth itself exhaling after holding its breath too long. And in the sudden quiet that followed, I realized we could hear sirens approaching from beyond the perimeter, real emergency services, finally able to penetrate the atmospheric field that had kept them away. The experiment was over. We had survived. But the questions were just beginning. The sound of my own breathing filled the service tunnel beneath Building 8 as I crawled through what had become a steam-filled maze of superheated metal and dying infrastructure. My radio crackled with Sura's increasingly desperate updates from the daycare center above. 21 children now showing severe altitude sickness symptoms, while federal agents documented their suffering like lab rats in a research protocol. Vorn, the little ones can't understand why they feel sick. Sura's voice broke through the static, carrying the barely controlled panic of someone watching kids suffer from invisible forces. Maya keeps asking why her ears hurt, and I don't know what to tell her because I'm supposed to protect these children, and I can't even see what's hurting them. I pressed my face against the tunnel's metal floor, trying to stay below the worst of the superheated air that would scar my lungs if I breathed it directly. How many are still conscious? 18, but 3 of the older ones are showing signs of severe disorientation. The federal agents are taking detailed notes on response times and symptom progression. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Vorn, they're not here to help. They're here to watch what happens when you expose children to weaponized atmospheric control. Above me, the tunnel's steel framework groaned under thermal stress that was tearing the building's infrastructure apart piece by piece. Each support beam was expanding and contracting as superheated steam moved through systems never designed for such punishment, creating the sound of a structure slowly eating itself alive. I reached the junction where the main atmospheric array control panel was housed, a space that had been cramped even under normal conditions, but was now filled with steam so hot it felt like breathing liquid fire. Alira's modifications to bypass the federal security lockout were still intact, but the control interface was almost too hot to touch. My radio exploded with Kalitha's voice from the Building 8 lobby. Vorn, federal agents are sealing the perimeter. They're not letting anyone leave the campus. They're treating this as a containment exercise for expanded data collection. What does that mean? It means they've classified everyone on the campus as research subjects. Employees, contractors, visitors, children, we're all part of their atmospheric manipulation study now. His voice carried the exhausted anger of someone who'd spent hours being debriefed by federal agents who treated human suffering as data points. And Phase 3 authorization just came through. They want to expand the test to include municipal emergency responders. I could see the main shutdown interface through the steam, but reaching it would require crawling directly through superheated air that would cause severe burns. My work gloves were already too hot to keep on, and the metal surfaces around me were radiating heat like oven elements. Alira, what's the status on the pressure equalization sequence? Her response came through layers of radio interference. The atmospheric arrays are operating at 127% of design specifications. If we shut down suddenly without proper pressure cycling, the rapid equalization could cause explosive decompression across all affected buildings. What about gradual shutdown? Federal agents have administrative override on all building systems now. Even if we could access the shutdown protocols, they have authorization codes we can't bypass. Through the tunnel's access grate, I could see federal agents moving between buildings, directing employees toward specific areas. They weren't emergency responders. They were researchers expanding their data collection operation while people got hurt. My radio crackled with overlapping distress calls from across the campus. Building 12 main support beam showing stress fractures. Elevator rescue attempts failing, 15 people still trapped. Several adults now reporting severe respiratory distress. Municipal emergency services being prevented from approaching campus perimeter. I pressed my face against the tunnel floor and forced myself to think through the tactical situation like the building systems emergency I'd trained for, not the federal research project I'd been trapped in. The atmospheric arrays were designed with fail-safes, but the federal agents had overridden normal shutdown procedures to maintain their research environment. Sura, how long can you keep the children stable? Not much longer. 3 of them are losing consciousness, and the medical staff can't get accurate readings on anything because their equipment won't function properly in these atmospheric conditions. Her voice broke slightly. Vorn, Maya just asked me if the bad air is going to make her die like her goldfish did when the tank water got too hot. Tell her the bad air is going away soon. Can you promise that? I looked at the shutdown interface through the superheated steam, calculating whether I could reach it without sustaining burns severe enough to prevent me from completing the shutdown sequence. The metal surfaces were radiating heat that would scar exposed skin in seconds, and the air itself was hot enough to damage my respiratory system. But the alternative was letting federal researchers continue their atmospheric manipulation experiment while children suffered from conditions designed to test civilian population response to weaponized environmental control. "I can promise that," I said, pulling off my radio and setting it where Sura could hear what happened next. I took the deepest breath my lungs could hold and crawled directly into the superheated steam toward the shutdown interface. The pain hit immediately, my exposed hands making contact with metal surfaces hot enough to sear flesh, the superheated air feeling like swallowing molten glass. But the interface was responding, cycling through security protocols that federal agents had locked down to prevent exactly what I was attempting. My fingers found the emergency pressure equalization sequence that Alira had identified, not a sudden shutdown that would cause explosive decompression, but a gradual pressure cycling that would slowly return atmospheric conditions to normal physics while minimizing structural damage. Through the haze of steam and pain, I could see the interface displaying warnings about unauthorized system access, but the shutdown sequence was already initiating across all 8 buildings simultaneously. Above me, the building's steel framework began making different sounds, not the groaning of metal under impossible thermal stress, but the settling noise of infrastructure returning to conditions it was designed to handle. I crawled back toward the tunnel entrance, my hands and forearms showing angry red burns from contact with superheated metal, but the radio was carrying Sura's voice with new hope. "Vorn, the pressure's equalizing. The children are breathing easier." Outside the tunnel, I could hear the atmospheric manipulation arrays across the entire campus winding down with the sound of massive machinery finally allowed to stop operating beyond its design limits. The visible steam that had been rising from manholes and building vents was dissipating as water throughout the complex started behaving according to normal thermodynamics. But as the atmospheric field collapsed, my radio picked up emergency communications. "System shutdown detected. Implementing security protocols for unauthorized personnel." "Caliph, what does that mean?" "It means they're treating us as security risks who know too much about classified defense research." His voice carried new urgency. "Vorn, they're not planning to let us leave." Through the tunnel's exit, I could see federal vehicles positioned around the buildings, and agents were directing employees toward specific areas rather than evacuation routes. We'd stopped the atmospheric manipulation experiment, but the containment situation was still developing. In the distance, I could finally hear sirens approaching, Real Emergency Services, finally able to reach the campus now that the atmospheric field had collapsed. But they were approaching a facility that was being secured by federal agents who had classified everyone inside as part of a research project that had never been properly authorized. We'd saved the children from the atmospheric manipulation. But I was starting to realize the questions about what happened next might be even more dangerous than the questions about what had happened during the experiment. The decontamination tent they'd set up in the parking lot smelled like industrial disinfectant and fear. Through the plastic sheeting, I could see Sura helping the children from the daycare center board the medical transport vehicles, all 21 of them walking under their own power, breathing normal air for the first time in 8 hours. My burned hands were wrapped in gauze that made everything I touched feel distant and unreal. "The atmospheric pressure readings are back to baseline," Caliph reported from beside me, his voice carrying the exhausted relief of someone who'd spent hours convinced we were all going to suffocate from air that had forgotten how to behave like air. All buildings showing normal pressure, normal humidity, normal temperature gradients. But normal wasn't the right word for what we were experiencing. The federal agents conducting our debriefing had been asking the same questions for 2 hours. "Describe exactly what you observed regarding the water temperature anomalies. Explain your understanding of the HVAC system modifications. Detail any communications with outside personnel regarding the atmospheric irregularities." They weren't interested in our health, our fear, or how we'd managed to save 21 children from atmospheric conditions that had violated everything we understood about how air pressure and water temperature were supposed to work together. They were interested in documenting a classified weapons test that had gone exactly according to their research parameters. "The system shutdown sequence you initiated," the lead agent continued, consulting notes that seemed to contain more information about our campus than any of us had ever possessed, resulted in complete atmospheric field collapse across all affected buildings. Can you explain your knowledge of the pressure equalization protocols? Through the tent's opening, I could see Alira being interviewed separately, federal agents taking detailed notes as she explained modifications she'd made to bypass security systems she'd never been told were connected to defense research projects. Her face showed the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from realizing you've been manipulated into participating in something that was designed to hurt people. I didn't know about any weapons research, I told the agent for the fourth time. I'm an HVAC systems engineer. When water started boiling at room temperature, I treated it as a life safety emergency. And yet you were able to access classified atmospheric manipulation controls that should have been impossible for civilian personnel to identify or operate. That was the question they kept returning to, how we'd known enough to stop something we weren't supposed to know existed. The implication was clear. Either we'd been briefed on classified systems we weren't authorized to access, or we'd demonstrated capabilities that suggested we might be more than civilian HVAC technicians. My radio crackled with Sura's voice from the medical transport area. Vorn, Maya wants to know if the air is safe now. She keeps asking if it's going to hurt again. Tell her the air is safe, I responded, though the words felt hollow in my mouth. Through the decontamination tent's plastic walls, I could see municipal emergency responders finally being allowed onto the campus. Fire department, paramedics, building inspectors, but they were being escorted by federal agents and limited to specific areas. The children were being transported to a military medical facility for comprehensive evaluation of exposure effects. The atmospheric manipulation technology demonstrated today, the lead agent continued, represents a significant advancement in area denial systems. Your ability to identify and disable the field suggests technical expertise that may be relevant to national security considerations. Caliph leaned forward, his voice carrying anger I'd never heard from him before. You're talking about weapons that make water boil at room temperature. We didn't identify anything. We just tried to keep children from dying when your experiment started killing them. The research project was conducted within authorized parameters for civilian population response assessment. No subjects experienced life-threatening exposure levels. Maya couldn't breathe properly for 6 hours. Subject responses were within expected parameters for atmospheric field exposure studies. That was when I understood what we were really dealing with. This hadn't been a malfunction or a test gone wrong. This had been a successful demonstration of a weapons system that could make basic physics stop working in specific areas, and we'd been the civilian population whose responses they'd wanted to study. The atmospheric manipulation field had worked exactly as designed. The only thing that had gone wrong from their perspective was that we'd figured out how to shut it down. My radio buzzed with a message from building security. All civilian personnel are being retained for extended debriefing procedures. Families have been notified of delayed departure times due to ongoing safety assessments. How long is extended debriefing? Sura's voice carried new concern. Until federal agents are satisfied that no personnel possess unauthorized knowledge of classified systems. I looked at my burned hands, wrapped in gauze that couldn't hide the fact that I'd crawled through superheated steam to reach controls for atmospheric manipulation technology that officially didn't exist. Caliph was documenting pressure readings from systems that had been making water boil at room temperature. Alira had modified federal security protocols to bypass classified defense systems. We knew too much about something we weren't supposed to know existed. The decontamination process, the lead agent announced, will continue until all personnel have been cleared for civilian release. This may require several days of comprehensive evaluation. Through the tent's plastic wall, I watched the last of the children disappear into medical transports that would take them to facilities where researchers could study the long-term effects of exposure to weaponized atmospheric control. Sura was climbing into one of the vehicles, her face showing the hollow expression of someone who'd realized she'd been protecting children from a research project that had been designed to hurt them. Vorn, Calith's voice was barely audible. Look at the atmospheric readings. I checked his monitoring equipment, expecting to see confirmation that all systems had returned to normal. Instead, the displays showed pressure fluctuations that were subtle but unmistakably wrong. Tiny variations that suggested the atmospheric manipulation field hadn't been completely shut down, just reduced to levels that wouldn't cause obvious physical effects. The water in the nearby buildings wasn't boiling at room temperature anymore, but the atmospheric pressure was still showing irregularities that meant the underlying technology was still active, just operating at lower power levels, just enough to maintain research data collection without causing symptoms obvious enough to prompt another shutdown attempt. "The field's still operational," I whispered to Caleth. "I know, but at levels low enough that most people won't notice the effects." "What kind of effects?" "Mild respiratory stress, pressure sensations, occasional dizziness. The kind of things people dismiss as stress or fatigue." I looked around the decontamination tent, at the federal agents taking notes on our responses, at the civilians being processed through safety assessments that were clearly designed to determine how much we understood about what had happened. None of us would be released until they were confident we couldn't explain to anyone else how atmospheric manipulation weapons worked. And even then, we'd be released into an environment where the technology was still active, just reduced to power levels that would let them continue studying civilian population responses without triggering another emergency shutdown. "The system we shut down," I asked the lead agent, "is it completely offline now?" "All atmospheric anomalies have been resolved. Civilian personnel will be released once decontamination procedures are complete." But Caleth's monitoring equipment was still showing pressure fluctuations that meant the weapons system was operational. The children would be released from military medical facilities once researchers had finished studying their exposure responses. Sura would return to work at a daycare center where the air would continue causing subtle respiratory stress that parents would attribute to seasonal allergies. And we'd all go back to our normal lives, knowing that the atmospheric manipulation technology was still running, just at power levels designed to be unnoticeable to people who weren't specifically monitoring for signs of weaponized environmental control. The federal agent closed his notebook and stood up. "Decontamination complete. You're cleared for civilian release." Through the tent's opening, I could see our cars in the parking lot, waiting to take us back to homes where we'd sleep under skies that were no longer subject to entirely normal physics. Tomorrow, we'd return to work in buildings where water would behave normally, but air pressure would continue fluctuating in ways that would cause headaches and fatigue that people would blame on stress. Maya would go back to asking innocent questions about why the air sometimes made her feel sick, and adults would tell her it was just her imagination. But as I walked toward my car, my radio crackled one final time with an automated building system alert. HVAC atmospheric monitoring active. Baseline data collection continuing. The field was still there, still studying us, still learning how civilian populations responded to invisible environmental manipulation. We'd stopped the children from dying, but we hadn't stopped the experiment. And as I drove home under a sky that looked normal but felt subtly wrong against my skin, I realized that might have been exactly what they'd intended all along.